Welcome, everyone. Some people are still joining in, but I wanted to welcome you to the workshop on smart funding for projects supporting urban transitions. This is hosted by the UT, but it was organized mainly by ENEA, which is the Italian National Agency of New Technologies, Energy, and Sustainable Economic Development. We are very happy to have you here. And today, actually, the focus of this session or workshop, because it's going to be a bit interactive, it's on funding and financing mechanisms to support urban transition projects. As you might know, DUT is it's funding urban transitions projects across Europe. So then we hope that this workshop helps you to get some insights on what are the mechanisms available. For that, we've invited 4 speakers that are from different organizations. One is the Italian Sustainable Investment Forum, another is Deloitte, Impact Europe, and Area Europa. So after each of the speakers present themselves and also their insights, there will be a Q&A session, so to speak. So if you see, there is an option for you to write questions and answers. So that's something that we want you to use for this webinar instead of the chat. All right. So I will not make you wait more. And I want to introduce my colleagues Paola and Silvia, who work at ENEA, and they will give a brief introduction about DUT and also about what we are going to talk about today. Paola, would you like to take over?
Thank you, Anna. Thank you very much. So welcome again to this workshop. Shortly, Anna has already presented the agenda, so we can skip to this slide and just to provide you some basic information on driving.
Sorry, Paola.
Yes.
Paola, we don't see the slides.
We do see the slides. I do see them.
Okay. Thank you. So it's a very, very basic information on driving urban transition. Driving urban transition is a European co-funded partnership. And basically, the aim of this partnership, which lasts 7 years, is to tackle urban challenges. We provide a lot of activity and information. Basically, as Anna mentioned, we found projects via call for project that appear every year. And then we have our huge activity with stakeholder communities. We engage a lot of communities. We have these 4 types of community: Agora, Do City Panel, Urban Doers Community, and the public officer and practitioner community. And Silvia will shortly present the public officer and practitioner community later. Then the aim of today's workshop. It is 3 years that we are promoting in the framework of public officer and practitioner community activities addressing various gaps. In 2022, we focus on organizational issues for local authorities, linking with the topic of city climate contract related to the mission 100 climate neutral cities. Then in 2023, our emphasis shifted to procedures and procurement, which is a tricky topic, especially because we are working internationally and there is a wide variety of procedure and procurement. So it is not easy to work on this topic. And then in 2024, we have decided to concentrate on funding and financing gaps. So today, selected experts keynote speaker will provide an overview on funding and financing mechanisms, which can support transition projects. And some best practice will be highlighted to stimulate discussion among participants. So today we will provide insights, and we hope that we will be able also to share ideas more than best practice. And we hope that thanks to this workshop, you will decide to become a member of this dynamic community committed to building a better future for our cities in the framework of driving urban transition partnership. So now I leave the floor to my colleague Silvia Bossi, and she will shortly introduce the public officer and practitioner community.
Yes. Hi, everyone. So I'll speak today about the public officer and practitioner community. So the aim of this community is to organize capacity building activity and to create new occasions to give new input to the public officer and practitioner community to help driving the urban transition. So far, the activity of this community has been focused on working on 4 different gaps. These gaps were identified by the Deloitte partnership mainly as the organizational gaps, the procedure and procurement, the technology and the finance gaps. These were identified as important barriers that can that could slow down the urban transition. So for this reason, with the activity done so far with the POPC.
Yeah, sorry. You do not share the screen.
You were sharing the screen, Paola.
Okay. Sorry.
You can start with the gaps.
Yes. Okay. Okay. Sorry. That's it.
Yes.
You can continue, Silvia.
Yeah, so as I said, in the next, you can go with the next slide. So we focused on 4 different gaps. As I say, the organizational, the finance, the procedure and procurement gaps, and the technology gaps. So far, as you see in the next slide, we focused on the organizational in 2022. Then we worked on the procedures and procurement gaps in 2023, and now is the time to start with the finance and gaps. So this is why you are going to listen to the speaker that we invited today. So in the next slide, what you see is who is part of this community. So yes. So who is part of the POP community? Basically, we identified 2 types of individuals that are key in driving the urban transition. These are the public officers. So we mean employees working in a public, central, or local government, and that somehow are related to the urban transition. And then we have the urban practitioners. So those that have expertise, and even though they are not inside the public governments, they also can share important expertise useful for driving urban transition. For this reason, we created also a dedicated social tool that is a continuous work in progress. And whoever wants to be part of this tool or of our community can fill the Google form that you see at the bottom of the page. So I guess we are ready now to start with our speaker.
Thank you, Silvia, for this introduction. Yes, our first speaker is Francesco Bicciato. He's the executive director in the Italian Sustainable Investment Forum. And he has also worked in the past at the United Nations and other public and private international organizations. So he's going to talk about the topic of sustainable finance for transition. And after the presentation, he will be happy to answer some of the questions that you have. So please feel welcome to write them in the Q&A section of Zoom. Francesco, I see you're ready.
Yes, I'm ready. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Paola, for the invitation. Introduce myself. I'm Francesco Bicciato, as Anna said, Director General of for Italian Forum for Sustainable Finance. Today, I'm here with my colleague Isabel Roisch, that after my introduction will complete our presentation regarding the sustainable tools, financial tools that we are working today. So please, Isabel, if you can put the next slide. Okay, so first of all, who we are, what we are doing, and the second issue is that we try to talk about the sustainable finance instrument for the transition, and at the end some reflection with about the just transition. Of course, we will have a focus on urban issues that are using some sustainable bonds and other financial bonds tailored on cities and municipalities context. So next one. Okay, we are a non-profit organization. We founded in 2001 when sustainable finance was a niche. Now it is mainstream, so our role and our position in the market is completely different, and the aim promotes the awareness of strategies linked to sustainable investment, and encourage mid to long-term investment strategies. I mean, they try to move increasing volume of capital towards ESG practice. Our stakeholders are institutional and retail investors, financial institutions, consultants, and Italian and European policymakers. Go ahead. Next, please. The three pillars very quickly are research, project, and policy and advocacy. Research, we can say we run research between academy and a practitioner. It is a sort of applied research regarding all the items, all the topics that are dealing the issue of sustainable finance. We inform also the financial community, media, and society regarding with the communication campaign, seminars, and cultural events, like, for example, the SRI Week that start next 24th of October in Milano. And the third one, which is one of the most important right now activity, is the policy activity. The policy activity due to the fact that, as you know, we have a lot of an increasing rules and regulation coming from European Commission. So what we are doing is to study the impact that this regulation can have in the market, in the sustainable finance market. Next. We are a multi-stakeholder organization. 70% more or less of forum is composed by the financial industry, so asset manager, banks, pension fund, banking foundation, insurance company. But we have also a 30% of our members which are coming from civil society, so NGO. We have, for example, WWF, Legambiente, and trade union, etc., etc. etc. This is quite important for us because we can deal and focus the sustainable finance from different point of view, not only from the point of view of the financial operators, but with this multi-stakeholder approach. Okay, next. We are part of the European community. The name is the EuroSIF, is a pan-European network with 11 forum like our forum. We are ITASIF, but there are other 10 forum that compose the EuroSIF. EuroSIF has the main objective the main purpose to talk with the European Commission, especially DG FISMA, which is the general direction that deal with the issue of finance. So our main interlocutors. Okay. We produce a lot of research. Here there are some example. We conduct research on sustainable investment policies of Italian pension schemes, so looking for a retail market. Another is regarding banking foundation, just to understand which are the trend of increasing in sustainable finance inside of banking foundation investment. Another one, for example, is in analysis that we do every year regarding the insurance company, take into account that the insurance company are the main player in sustainable finance activities. Then next, just to give you an idea what we are doing, we work on the SMEs. SMEs is one of the most important analysis that we are doing in the next 4 years. So we have a sort of synchronic idea, which is the increase of awareness inside of SMEs regarding sustainability issue. And then we have another important report as a sort of answer, technical answer and scientific answer against the campaign anti-ESG, which is something quite interesting. So we are trying to explain using not ideological approach, but a scientific approach, why these arguments against the ESG are absolutely false in most of cases. Okay. So just other 3 issues before to give the floor to Isabel. First of all, we have to define a sustainable finance, which is an investment that aim to create value for investor and society through mid to long-term investment strategy. This is it's quite important. We are not talking about short-term finance, but we are talking about mid to long-term investment strategies that include environmental, social governance and the financial aspects. So, I mean, that is quite important to underline this. I mean, the ESG are not complementary to financial aspect, but are an integral part of the financial decision, which is the difference we can say between sustainable finance and the traditional way of to use financial tools. The SRI is another acronym that you can find in all the official documents. So sustainable responsible investment can be based on a diversified range of strategies which are not mutually exclusive and can apply to the same portfolio in different asset classes, shares, bonds, private equity, and private debt. And regarding the strategies, you can have the exclusion strategy, engagement, best in class, etc., or you can have a mix of these strategies in the selection of your portfolio investment. Okay.
Thank you, Francesco. I'll go into the next one.
Okay, please.
Please utilize our research to see the sustainable finance on the Italian market and how it's using, who's using what and how are they using it. Today, we want to talk about, hang on. Today, we want to talk about financing in Europe. Financing in Europe has one very important underlying, which you have to address before you even start addressing finance, and that is the EU taxonomy. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because I think the examples of some of the financing is more interesting, but please be aware that if you are not applying EU taxonomy, i.e. the classification system, you will have a lot of problems getting any sort of public funding, any sort of national or European funding. So this is very important. What is the taxonomy classify? It classifies activities, economic activities regarding 6 objectives: climate change mitigation, climate change adaptation, sustainable use and protection of water and marine resources, transition to a circular economy, pollution prevention and control, and protection and restoration of biodiversity and ecosystems. These criteria and the way in which they're classified and applied to the activities are being updated every 5 years. The next update should be coming in the next years. So we should be seeing that. So activities are matched into one of those 6 objectives. And at the same time, none of your activities should do significant harm. And there are minimum safeguards for social protection. I would suggest that you have a look at the website of the EU, which I mentioned in the first slide and I'm mentioning right now, because it's really important to understand how to use it correctly to access also the correct financing. This is I thought, a very interesting report on what is taxonomy doing. And for instance, the last point the companies that are reporting according to taxonomy are correlated to positive market performance. So I think that is also very important. It's also because when companies are looking for investment and looking for money, they're trying to at least showcase it. So this is something that I would suggest you have a look at. It is very important as underlying to any of the financial instruments. If we go into the financial instruments, since we have very little time today, we are going to concentrate on the first one, but be aware that there are many instruments out there and there are new ones being created. We have sustainability-linked bonds, transition bonds, water bonds, for instance. We have sustainable mini bonds, basket of mini bonds, we have green loans, we have green REITs. There's a huge amount and plethora of instruments that is available, and we believe there's going to be more in the future. We also think that it is important to concentrate on the one that is different, that is new, and is very European driven. It's a new asset class that was created in Europe, which is the green bond. With it, next to it, the sister or the brother, if you want to call it, the social bond. And then the one that combines social and green bond is the sustainability bond, not to be confused with the sustainability linked bond, please. The most important aspect of these bonds is the use of proceeds. The use of proceeds is clear, precise. You know where it's going to. It's going to a specific project, and there's going to be a ex ante before you quote it, and an ex post after you've quoted it, and over the years, a third-party independent analysis of this. So the proceeds are very clear. It is something that is very much liked by the younger generations because they know exactly where the money is going. Excuse me. the EU set up the EU Green Bond Standard, which basically says that the proceeds have to be aligned with the EU taxonomy. Here we see the connection again to the taxonomy. You have a little bit of leeway in the bond, and this is mainly for the cash because the projects are not always running at 100%. The whole standard is voluntary, which is interesting if you want to consider that. But the importance of being voluntary is that if you are not doing it, the market will not price you accordingly. The markets are pricing as if you're taking as they're obligating you to do all of these steps. So the voluntary is just because it's voluntary, but if you want the right pricing and you want to have an oversubscribed issue, you have to adhere by it. Excuse me, I do have a cold. Municipal green bonds are basically being used by cities to raise money. And the municipal green bonds are important as a category because they're normally very well subscribed. They're very much liked. So it is something that a city can really, really use. And if we consider that a lot of the energy consumption and the carbon emissions are coming from cities, this is where we should be using it. This is also a way for you to access the largest liquid market. If we access the largest liquid market, you're going to have a good bond in there, right? Because on that market, let me just say, no, I'll say that on the last slide. I brought two examples. One is Barcelona. Barcelona set up a framework in which they said, we're going to issue sustainability bonds, excuse me, dividing up between social, environmental things, access to essential services, socio-economic progress, affordable housing, job creation. And then you have the environmental ones, energy efficient, sustainable mobility, pollution prevention, and water resources. You set up a framework, and then every time you need to issue a bond, you issue it within that framework. Here we can see that you have from school construction to library renovation to acquisition of ITC equipment for people who cannot afford it, to furniture, to improvement on charging station, everything. So this is the type of project they want to address with the framework. As a city, it is important to have a framework that is large so you can get all of your projects within it. I apologize. This is the Junta de Galicia. The reason why I brought it is because they have a very nice financial, sustainable finance framework. When they issued the first bond, what happened is that within the first 90 minutes, they were 4 times oversubscribed. So basically, people like this type of bond. The markets love these type of bonds. What do? They target 6 green and 5 social categories. The independent analysis or second opinion, as it is called, is done by Sustainalytics. So that is something very positive. This is one that has had a lot of success. This one I brought to you as information. It is a study by the Climate Bond Initiative of how many times they're oversubscribed versus normal bonds. I thought it was very, very interesting to see the differences of how many times oversubscribed and how big the demand is for these bonds. So it is something you should consider. For us, the actors that need to be participating here are the 3: policymakers, companies, and financial market participants. They all have to work together. If we don't work together, we're not going to achieve it. And in the case of a city, we can substitute company for city. Francesco, you want to do the just transition?
Yes, yes, Isabel. So very quickly regarding the just transition mechanism, as you know, for the European Green Deal, the objective was making sure that no one is left behind. So next one. Okay, as you can see here, there is something important. I mean, that one of the most important criticism of the transition is that there is a social problems related to the risk of jobs loss. Here we can see that in reality, employment in green energy sector grow from 32 millions to 70 millions by 20 and 30, and more than offsetting the loss of 8.6 million jobs in fossil industries. And again, the green jobs offer wages 21% higher than the average, and the wage premium is even higher from low education jobs. So there are opportunities of substituting, we can say, the more skilled jobs that compensate the social risk that in effect it is in front of us. Next one, and just to conclude this introduction, we have Greenpeace, for example, that talk about 163,000 new job in 2030. Electricity future. This is an analysis of WWF, quite interesting, that 60 gigawatts of renewable in the next 3 years translates these gigawatts into jobs, estimating 80,000 new jobs position. And Green Italy 2020 companies that have invested in green projects and technologies are estimated at 432,000. Employment impact is an estimate. There is an estimation of 3.1 million jobs. So this is quite interesting. So we think that we have to push towards just transition and not to forget the social objective, which are part of the initial sustainable finance European Commission Act. So this is the last one, I think. Yes, if there are some questions, I saw some question in the chat, just to answer very quickly to Sylvia that asked me which is the work of Eurosif. Eurosif is we have a board in Brussels nominated by the members, the 11 members of Eurosif. We work a lot on policy issue, especially on policy issue, and with a continued dialogue with the European Commission. We are part of EFRAG, and we are, I can say, the only organization that work on sustainable finance in this with this whole approach. Okay, this is our work. It is absolutely in continuity with our colleague in the other countries. The dialogue and the alignment of our objectives is quite important. Okay. Paula said, are policymakers and public officers ready for the green bond? This is a good question, Paula. We started right now a dialogue with the Italian government, for example, and try to, especially with the Minister of Finance, try to understand if we can share an engagement relationship with the institution, with the public institution. It's not easy, but we started this dialogue both with the Minister of Finance and also with the Minister of Education, because the part, for example, of financial education is quite important at all level. We created also an intergroup, a parliamentary intergroup, left and wing side, of course, in order to promotes inside of the public institution the sustainable finance issue. So this is an approach that we have as the only one forum in Europe. The other colleague in Europe, they don't have this engagement approach that we have, and we will see which will be the results of this. Okay, no, I don't know if Isabel wants to answer to other questions.
No, that's enough for me. Thank you.
Yes. Okay. So I saw other question here. Sorry, I have to check the chat. Policymakers, which type of support you could provide to our international community? More workshop, guidelines, tools? This is good questions. We are starting right now the SRI week. Take into account that we have a network of around 10,000 people that in the year follow our activities. We will have 21 events that started from 24 with the opening in Milano, and the close conferences will be in Rome. So from 24 October to 7 of November. So I invite you to follow the site of the forum, and you can see all the seminars that you are organizing. Take into account that we have a lot of invited speaker and high-level speaker, and also we have the presence of the government in many of these conferences, which is quite important because, as you know, the debate regarding just transition is a strong debate at the moment. I mean that we will talk about transition, but not only transition, but a transition that take into account to have a very strong direction towards Agenda 2030 objectives. So this is something that we will discuss in these webinars, conferences, etc. Something in presence, something on webinar. So if you want to follow some of them, I invite you to subscribe in our website. Okay, this is.
Thank you, Francesco. I see that there are no more questions, but if someone else has a question that comes up later on, please write it in the Q&A and direct it to Francesco. All right. So our next speaker is Michael Flynn. He works on investment in infrastructure, transport, and mobility at Deloitte. And he's going to be talking about a topic that is funding and financing of urban development. So Flynn, if you would like to introduce yourself and take over.
Great. Good morning, everyone, and very good to be here and speak to you. Speaking from a damp Dublin today. So Michael Flynn, I'm the global leader for Deloitte for infrastructure, transport, and regional government. And in my day job, I work on funding and financing infrastructure projects and urban spaces. This is a very challenging global issue. And because if you look at the overall spend, so we started off with an infrastructure ask of about, and I'm talking global numbers, about 5 trillion a year. And then if you add on the climate and sustainability demands, that increases that by another 2 to 3 trillion per annum. Particularly post-COVID, governments probably only have at best 50% of that amount of money, and that's in Europe and throughout the world. So, but while there is sufficient capital around the world to satisfy this, there just isn't enough public money, and therefore the interaction of public funding and private finance is necessary in order to deliver this. So if we look at the overall theme, I mean, why is urban spaces important? Well, 65% of the population is likely to live in cities by 2050. There's a huge, and the last presentation was very interesting. I mean, there's a huge focus on sustainability. Not only citizen demands, we've got the various Paris agreements, but now finance and developers are very focused on, I need to build an asset that is net zero, that it operates at net zero. And if I'm a financier, I do not want to give any finance to something that has a target of net zero, or at least has a sustainability focus. And that's coupled with, from a government point of view, is that citizens are demanding this. And so that increases that you've got that need, which increases the cost in some ways, but also how it operates, and it's a different way. It also may limit you if you don't address this, and from a private finance point of view. There's a public-private mix, as I said. We need private capital to align with public funding in order to fill the gap. The last bit is because aligned somewhat with sustainability, but others with the way we all operate now. So we all live, and we our day is driven by what's in our phone. So as a citizen, we want to interact more with the infrastructure, with the city, with the city services. And so our expectation is that they're technology enabled. And then in order good infrastructure now within a city is now technology enabled, so it can interact, so you can manage it better, operate it better, and even get have sustainability gains. Now that brings additional challenges, because technology is shorter term compared to cement and heavy duty infrastructure. But also it needs to be upgraded and updated constantly. So how do you align that sort of shorter term movement of technology with long-term assets? And when you're thinking about financing, all very relevant. So if we look at urban spaces, there are various layers. So you've got the land, which is either owned by, has various owners. You've got the deep infrastructure, that's the roads and the rail, but the pipes and the wires, and how do you get energy in there, and renewable. You want that now renewable as much as possible from a sustainability point of view. You have to run your city and all of the city services, and then sitting on top of that is a mix of resi, commercial, retail and industrial, and all various types of what are sort of oftentimes private assets. And then there's public realm space. But if you look at that entire picture, you can see that there's different owners, different players, different revenue streams potentially. Some of them are easier and more addressable by private sector in terms of, if I have a commercial property, as long as I can rent it for enough, and if I've got a tenant and I've got a high enough rent, I can raise sufficient money to align that to build it. It's pretty straightforward. But if I've got public spaces, what does is it just public sector should pay for that? But everybody benefits. And is there a way that the commercial property, which is opposite the park, which is increases value, or is just on top of or beside the transport node within the city that government has installed, is it fair that they get all of that value uplift because of the demand versus infrastructure, the city paying for all that infrastructure? But there is different models of financing that's available within each of these categories. I'll come back to some of those. But the other bit to remember is you have lots of people who are interested in this. And the more you get into public infrastructure, the more stakeholders that you've got involved, and there's a whole heap down there, down the right hand side. But other things that you need to do in order to create a city is you need to create a destination. When you're looking at developing any project, and that's across all of those categories, whether you're public or private sector, is you need to look at viability. Is what is the business model? You know, what is the value you're developing, and how do you manage risk? And then things like community involvement, that's the, you know, again, the stakeholder management piece, and making sure it aligns with the overall master plan, that it's doing what your city wants. But it is a challenge, and not that this all impacts on the financing, but it can impact on timing of when this can be done. It can impact on the revenue models, which impacts on financing. It can impact on the design that you need to put in place, which can impact on cost, which has an impact on financing. So all relevant. The other bit I just touch on before I get into the financing piece is we've done a look at trends for cities, and you know, not unexpectedly, I mean, there is a greater demand by citizens to make the cities easier to move around, make them more sustainable, socially inclusive. That equity piece is as a you know, ESG format. Increased amount of technology, so AI and smart going into cities is a key bit, and that technology point that I raised earlier. But the increasing risk of that as well is cyber. You know, so cyber attacks on infrastructure is a real thing, where you know, a foreign body can take over the activity of an asset. So what happens if that was your water system, for example? So it's very important that they're secure. And if I'm a financier coming into it, I need to make sure that you've covered those things off. So things that we may not have worried about in the past is now very, very relevant in terms of it's an increased cost, it's an increased risk, but something that needs to be managed. So some of the challenges, you know, there isn't enough money. Because you got to bring finance in, you've got to find a way. So finance needs to get repaid. So how do you create a revenue stream that can ideally beyond where revenues where the public sector comes in order to repay that finance? And questions is it a valuable service or offering that the citizen is willing to pay extra above what tax they pay? I'll talk about capturing value in a moment, but I talked to, you know, that bit of the park or the transport node besides a commercial building. You know, you're creating value, but how can you capture some of that? And then leveraging, you know, blended finance, where you're bringing a bit of public sector, a bit of private sector, how you're managing risk with public money but attracting in private money is important. And it is important, ideally, when you're spending public money, achieving value for money and all of those things are very important. As I also said, the technology bit causes a challenge, because you've got the demand for technology, but it is different. It is shorter term. You know, who owns the IP? What happens if there's cyber attacks? What's the revenue model? All of those things have to be worked through. Manageable, but needs to be worked through. So when we're looking at this, we try and put together a process and trying to make this a little bit easier, and we sort of, it's as easy as 1, 2, 3. But if you look at some governments, when they often go in and they say, we need to get private capital, we don't have enough here, and the immediate response generally is that we're going to do a public-private partnership, PPP. Now, in the market, that has a particular structure, oftentimes seen as being inflexible, and it's quite a big process and it's very robust and you know, does work in certain circumstances. But when you bring more shorter term like technology in there, it makes it more challenging. So one of the things when we're looking at this is, one is we look at private sector participation rather than just PPPs. So we try and broaden it as saying, well, how can I get private sector in general get more involved in funding and financing these spaces? But also, that delivery method, the decision on how that structure is, we put right to the back end when we actually know what we're trying to structure, rather than starting from the end answer. So we build it up and we say, well, okay, let's look at the business model. Cost is relatively straightforward to understand, so you can put together, how much is this going to cost me to build, to operate. You can put all those things together. But then it is how do I generate revenue? Is there a revenue stream that I can? Is there value being created for somebody else that I can try and generate? And then then what's is there a private sector that would be willing to take those risks or get involved in this? And so how do can I identify those things? And is there returns available? Will income exceed cost over time and therefore make a return? And if there's a return potential, then I can get the private sector involved. I'll come to value in a moment, but all investments in infrastructure generally creates a value. It's who does that value accrue to, and is it monetizable? And that can be either direct, indirect, and then there's also things like asset recycling. So there were times when public sector owns other assets that it may not have as much value for, or somebody else may have a higher perceived value for it. Now, if you're trying to achieve things and trying to find funding for wider projects, is that you may want to recycle that. So maybe sell it, maybe let it, maybe just monetize it in some way, so that you can bring those funds into the overall mix. It's only when you've put that together, so you understand cash flows is key here. What are the proposed cash flows from a cost and a revenue point of view, and that value monetization, that then you figure out the funding options, funding and financing options, what public, what private, and monetized value you can throw into there. And then when you've done all of that, then you look at the various delivery options and procurement options that you have. So I'll deal a bit with the value capture first, because it is one thing that we often forget. So if you look at direct value capture, that's where I have the asset. It's it's providing a service. Can I either charge that to citizens, or charge that, create a revenue model? And I'm going to try and go down to this first. So here are examples. So where the public sector can, in some ways the money's coming from the public sector, and what that's doing is by bringing in private finance it's saying, bring me in private finance, so I don't need to put as much money in up front, and I can stretch my public money. And there's a net present value benefit to that. And it also deals with maybe put it into current budgets. So I could do everything from, I can get the private sector to put all this together, and I will, as a public sector, give you enough money to repay your debt and your costs on an equal basis and give a return. So it's simply just giving you money as you need it. All the time, availability payments, I may now want to restrict it, that I only pay it to you when the asset is available to me. And therefore, while I'm covering all your costs, I am making deductions if the asset doesn't work. Or other times I get somebody to do something for me as a public sector, and I create a saving. So, retrofit of buildings to make them net zero. There's energy savings. So am I willing to pay the difference of my energy saving, or a share of that, in order to pay for the retrofit? Shadow tolls, aligning with payments with the actions of people. And then you get down into where now you shifted away from being public sector into, can I charge somebody else? Can I charge a user fee, like a toll or a rate type payment, that I'm charging all of the real estate in a particular area because this is an asset that's available. And then other things that come in, pay as you go type services, subscription based, advertising based. Is this an asset that I can sell space on? And so there's a variety of revenue generating ways, but generally the public sector or the private sector is better at doing this. But it is a way of how can I use the asset, identify ways to create a revenue stream, and then utilize that to pay back my private finance. Indirect value capture is slightly different. And this is where I was talking about the park or the transport node. If you, as an example, if you go to Hong Kong and you look at the MTR system there, the metro system, if you look at their accounts, it looks like a real estate company that happens to have a train, but it is the metro company. And what it's done is at each of the transport nodes, it's built huge real estate elements. And it's paid for the metro by building real estate. Now, what that's, how do I align that to here is that if I'm a public sector and I pay for the transport, that's a big cost to me. Now, but the real value it goes to those who are at the transport nodes, like the real estate. So if I'm owning a commercial building, an office building in a certain area, and suddenly a railway station comes right beside me, huge value uplift in my real estate. Why shouldn't I be able to get, as public sector, get a portion or a share of that value increase to help pay for the infrastructure? And there's things like development fees and planning levies and all of that sort of thing are brought in. But the other bit is oftentimes the land around those transport nodes are owned by the public sector. What the public sector doesn't do is trying to develop that real estate itself, a bit like the Hong Kong type model. And so as a public sector, can you look at, is there value I can generate? Maybe you don't have to do it yourself. You can partner with a developer to do it. But it's saying, I have land around an area that I've suddenly created lots and lots of value in here. Can I do something to monetize that value and help pay for the other assets? And as I said, asset recycling is where you have other assets that you may want to sell or transfer to get value. That then feeds in and says, I've got cash flow. I understand my costs. I understand my revenues. And then you try and align that with funding that, if what's available, but also is it the right thing to use that public money into there? Generally, that doesn't need to be repaid. And then, private finance going from debt, hybrid is somewhere in between, and equity, which is the high willingness to take highest risk. So you're going from low to high risk when you're going from debt to equity. But but also the cost of funds is increasing. So you're always trying to make this as cheap as possible, but it doesn't quite work that you can just go take all of the cheap money at the one time. So, but there are lots and lots of options. There is lots and lots of capital available. It's about structuring the projects in order to get that in there. And leveraging that public money in order to get it into the private, to bring in private money is important. Not always easy, but certainly you can manage risks and it's understanding the transaction. And ideally, you would not use where anytime you can get private capital into a project is that you will bring that in, because I talked about earlier, you've got to stretch that public money. How do you do that? So you need to bring private capital in. Again, what we often do is that public funding is used for the easiest projects, and that's the wrong way to do it, because it's almost wasting that money. And so you want to find ways to stretch it as much as you can. And then, as I said, you come to this last, the delivery. How do you actually implement? When I've designed, figured it out, the business case, I figured out where I'm getting my money and where value is. I figured out what type of capital I want to bring in here. Now, how do I contract that? And there's various structures where you can go from government owned to private sector participation of varying levels and varying level of control. And it depends on the project, depends on the revenue stream, depends on the gap between how it's paid off. But it does make it, we tend to push away, as I talked about, we tend to jump on that PPP concession type structure. Quite inflexible, takes a long time to go in, bit expensive. Does work in instances, But a bit of flexibility on either side, and looking at understanding the transaction allows you to bring more in, and it is about bringing private capital in. So I thought I'd just run through a bit of an example on how this looks structurally. I know I'm running tight on time, but I'll just, this is the understanding the project from a cost point of view. You've got the cost of the capex, the capital. You've got to presume in business cases that there might be overruns or delays, and then you should also look at your operating costs, because if you don't assess a project over its full lifetime, you really can't understand the costs. And this is everything. This is from making it sustainable, making it green, and building and running it. Now, if I'm putting a private sector structure on that, well, I tend to want to finance my construction phase, because that's the big phase, and I want to put as much debt in there as I can, because that's the cheapest form of finance. Now, this is going to vary depending on the project, depending on the revenues, depending on the risks, all of those sort of things. And so that the equity might be bigger, which is more expensive. Sub debt is sort of a quasi, various type of instruments, but a lot of the instruments that were mentioned earlier will fit in there at some place. And then ideally, you're figuring a revenue stream that will pay off operating costs and life cycle costs. And life cycle costs being how you maintain your capital asset over its lifetime. Now, as I said, you've got those costs, but you've got to repay it, and you've got to figure out it somehow. And it's about the revenue stream and the income stream. And it's figuring out how much of that needs to be supported by public sector. So ideally, you get third parties to pay for that, because that takes away the demand on public sector. But it may all be funded by public sector. That's just the reality. And what that does is it stretches. So instead of having to pay the capex up front, you're stretching and you're paying it over the lifetime of the asset. So you're just spreading your public money. But if you can reduce that even more, that's even better. So you're getting to stretch it, and you're getting the number reduced. And this is what happens on the private side, is that you have that income coming in, whether it's public or private, from third parties or from the public sector. But this is how they spend it. They pay back because they've already, the bank, the financing has paid the capex. So now it's all about in the operation phase. So it's paying back its operating costs. It's paying back those life cycle costs as they incurred. But then it's also repaying the financing. And this is, understanding that this is why it's important for the financier to understand the long-term business model of the project. So putting all of those things together is key. So I'll finish. The reality is there's a huge demand. It is an attractive asset class in terms of real estate or infrastructure. That public covenant is attractive. There's plenty of private capital available. Critical piece is that it's structured properly in order to allow it in, and that you're understanding the risks, and it's not about trying to make it too risky. They won't come in unless they can see they can make money. That's just their job is to make money from a private sector. They need to make sure that that's there. And to be able to demonstrate that, you need to see what is the income stream, what is the cash flow, how does all that work? Because that's how they assess it. So public sector has to address it in a private sector model. That technology piece I said brings complexity. So while we're the capex was a year one thing in the diagrams I showed. The reality is that that's in your life cycle costs, and that's updating, and so you need to build in reserves to do that. But ultimately, if we don't get this right, we won't have enough money. So the public-private mix to fund public infrastructure and those wider urban spaces is critical. So I'll take some questions. Hopefully not too far over time.
No, not at all, Michael. You are right on time. Yeah, we can look at the questions and answers, the Q&A.
I have written out my question in the chat. Sorry, I have no access to the questionnaire.
I mean, look, the first party to propose a project, it can come from anyone. I mean, but generally, public sector should own its own agenda, and be able to say, look, from a public sector point of view, here are our projects that are prioritized. Now, we worked with the Economist Impact Group about a year ago, and we developed a program around infrastructure for good. And one of the things we did notice was the selection of projects, the prioritization of it, up until now has been dominated by the economics of it. How much does it cost? How much do we get back? Is it value for money? All of that sort of stuff. And if you see where citizens are now and the prioritization, what that pure economic view doesn't necessarily get you the right result. It may do, but so what we looked from an infrastructure for good point of view is who evaluates and prioritizes projects based on ESG principles, and so therefore aligning with the needs and sustainability, and you know, I suppose making sure that they're being delivered, and that can change your prioritization list. But then when you take that, you've got to figure out then is how much money, you know, how much are these going to cost to do? Yes, they're prioritized. So, and how much public money have I got, and how can I stretch them? So all the principles I've just talked about in terms of stretching the public purse is critical. That once you have a list, you know, you've got to figure out what way you want to prioritize, then figure out how you stretch it, and that determines how much you do. One point I didn't raise so while each one of these is done on a per project basis, you do need to consider it on an overall basis, because there is only a finite amount of public money available, and you want to create that interlink. You want to create that the interlink of value and value capture as well. So putting all those bits together and knowing everything that's being built, and how you align those is a key piece overall as well.
Okay, thank you. And then there is another question. How is the environment and social impact of this project usually measured?
I mean, there's no difference in how they're measured versus any other project, because this is a financing point of view. I think what you'll find is there's even a greater with the reporting demands on private finance now, and private companies, is that actually forces a greater amount of monitoring on the sustainability and the environmental impacts of projects. As I said, our approach, trying to push a for good approach to prioritizing projects, should also help in terms of, as you evaluate these, is that it's more citizen focused and more environmental and equity focused as well. So I think that would help. But the measurement of it is as you will measure any of these projects in terms of you know, from an environmental point of view, the amount of emissions. But as I said, it will be even more of a driver from private finance.
Thank you.
It seems there are other questions.
Yes, there is another
Yes,
one.
one more.
May I just pose the question, are there any concrete examples of projects that have been implemented using this methodology?
Yeah, there's I mean, look, this is a framework that we use all the time on projects we use, you know, around the world. We did this. I mean, there's, rather than picking out an individual project, we worked with World Bank on the City Resilience Program, and worked with cities it was in Global South. I appreciate most of the people on this call are from the EU, But the same principles apply. It's how do you layer in public money. We worked with cities and said, look, here's a really important project to deal with flooding or waste or whatever, all equivalent projects, and we designed them on the same principle, and then looked at where how much public money, and it was limited. Could we bring in World Bank debt, and then could we bring in private investment into put these together? So we worked through, as I said, waste, some urban development, some transport hubs, and on that same basis. So yeah, this works. But it does need public sector to change their view, somewhat change their view that they're willing to blend their finance, and EU needs to probably move there. The developing economies have been there a long time because they knew a long time ago they didn't have enough money, and therefore that blended finance, particularly with donor funds, is one that they do, quite easily. What we want, ideally, is that EU governments look at that finite amount of money they have, look at the overall demand that they have, and then trying to see where you can blend that public and private mix appropriately. It's not to do that everything goes to private finance, or that you adjust it that way, but you can leverage it and you can achieve more by having this blended approach, and utilizing, considering the value concept and understanding where, if you think about it, instead of cash flows, is where do I make value, and how do I capture an appropriate share of that value. That then helps you in terms of working through, and public sector should be saying, well, if I'm spending my, what is citizens' money, well, I should be getting most value for that and sharing value. So it isn't appropriate that I as a citizen, I spend money and the real estate developer gets all the value. So how do I trap that and get a fair share of it? And so the more, EU is probably a little bit slower on getting there, because just where governments are, and they've been quite comfortable using their money on doing things. But I think we are at a point where we need to figure out ways to expand the budgets available.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation, Michael. A lot of questions, but thank you very much.
Good to be here. Thanks.